clearly I'm not Judy Sleed. I'm Jeff. I'm her son. I'm sitting in this chair for the next half hour or so, joined by Karl Grossman. That's not too difficult a name to pronounce. Have you had any odd pronunciations of that name?
Grossman's a pretty easy
Yep.
name to pronounce or to spell.
And unfortunately, as a kid, though, with the gross part of it, did you get poked fun?
Never was bothered.
Wow.
Never was bullied on the basis of my name.
You're fortunate.
Luckily, happily.
Sleed.
Oh.
Go figure with that one. So as I check at, looking at my notes here, it's hard to believe I'm reading 50 years or more. You have been covering politics. You can't be old enough to have been covering politics for 50 years or more.
Oh, yeah. I started as a journalist, as a reporter, let's see, in 1962. And doing the arithmetic, I'm 75 now. So doing the arithmetic, it's been over 50 years. And it's been politics I've covered, and I've done a lot of investigative reporting.
Right.
At the Long Island Press, where your dad worked. I knew him. And I've done it since the press sadly folded, because I'd still be there today if it was still around. It was a lovely paper to work for.
Pretty cool newspaper.
It was a nice newspaper. It was a people's newspaper.
Right.
When somebody called us up trying to get a story in the paper, they'd get a story in the paper.
Right, right.
You know, it was an easygoing place to work, and I did investigative reporting for the Long Island Press. I had a column which now still runs, and after the press went out, the weekly newspapers in Suffolk, including here in East Hampton, initially the East Hampton Star.
Right.
Now my column is in the East Hampton Press. Took the column I ran, I did at the Long Island Press, the Southampton Press. So I've been doing the column itself for about 50 years. And that's about politics. But a main focus of mine has been on the environment. Though I write a lot about other things. I did a book about Nicaragua and this.
Now, you would have no way of knowing this. My daughter is living in Nicaragua right now.
Really, in Managua?
No, I couldn't pronounce the name of the city or the town. My ex-wife and my daughter are very interested in helping the underprivileged.
Yeah.
So, not to deprive themselves too much, they built this enormous home so they can be comfortable themselves, but they're, I guess, doing good for the community. Just things that we take for granted. I'm sure you know all about just the running water and the medicine, and they have none of this, and so they're there for that cause.
Yeah, it's been a poor country, but it's a country that is, I found, so cultured.
Yeah.
I mean, Ruben Dario is their national poet, and one of his great favorites was Walt Whitman from Long Island.
Right.
And, you know, the kids I know of Walt Whitman in Nicaragua, just the level of culture, the art, the music. They were under a terrible dictatorship for decades upon decades. So it's an interesting place for your daughter to be, to help the folks, because they're very nice folks.
And so appreciative of just anything.
Yeah.
It's a nice perspective. You hear that saying a lot. It put things in perspective, and that's really from the things my daughter has shared with me that I took away from that. Just getting a bottle of water or some food just to share, and it's just a kind of a giving, all-encompassing thing. And here, not necessarily here, but a lot of places, we just take so many things for granted, in my opinion, and as opposed to just people who really appreciate that kind of things.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. I'm doing all the talking here, and I'm supposed to be interviewing you. So you're also a teacher, a professor.
Yeah, when the Long Island Press went out in '77, again, my column began running in the weekly papers, the one I had at the Daily Long Island Press. And then I got an offer to teach at the State University of New York at Old Westbury,
Right.
which has been a joy. I've been there for near 40 years. I'm a professor of journalism. I teach investigative reporting and environmental journalism and TV and radio journalism, and I've taught politics of media, things that are wrong with media, corporate control and
Media? What do you mean?
corporate control, and for years the racism and sexism in media, and so I run an internship program too for our students, and I place them on newspapers and TV stations and PR companies and internet sites. That's really why I try to get a lot of them placed, because that's kind of the future in media, the internet, the web, magazines and newspapers. They're still alive and well, no matter what people say. So that's what I do at SUNY Old Westbury. It's a lovely college, middle of Nassau County, so it's a bit of a trip for me because I live in Sag Harbor. But it's worth it. Every time I get there, it's been kind of like a dream to work at SUNY Old Westbury. It's so exciting. It's a wonderful college.
What are some of the more enjoyable things that you would do as far as the investigative side? Is it as glamorous as we would see or led to believe on some of these TV shows?
Yeah. It's not fast-paced in terms of doing investigative reporting. You got to be very persistent. You got to be very dogged. But I found that, well, it's just a great thing to do, because what you can do through investigative reporting, to me, the change you can cause when you expose what's bad, what's wrong, what's dangerous, what's corrupt. And I've been doing that as a journalist since '62. '62, I got a job in Babylon, at the Babylon Town Leader, challenging the plans of Robert Moses to build a 4-lane highway on Fire Island.
Wow.
And it took over, 2 years before he was stopped, and a Fire Island National Seashore was created instead of having this just beautiful ribbon of sand be paved over by a highway. And the magical communities, I mean, they're really unusual. They're very nice on Fire Island. And the nature, exquisite, the sunken forest and other, just lovely, just natural. And I'm from the city originally, not from Long Island, but even growing up in the city, I had a link with, I was an Eagle Scout, so you kind of learn when you're a Boy Scout to be in nature, to hike and to camp and all. And one of my other biggest stories was, this is kind of not even a national story, it turned out to be a kind of cosmic story, was I had learned in '85 that NASA wanted to launch 2 shuttles, one being the Challenger, in 1986, with these shuttles carrying plutonium-fueled space probes. And if an accident would occur, I mean, you'd have potentially plutonium all over the place, and it's considered the most toxic of all radioactive substances, plutonium. And
did you realize while you were investigating this story how big that was at the time?
Oh yeah, well, as soon as I saw it, I was reading a Department of Energy newsletter. I'm next to my lazy boy at home here. I live in Noyak, which is a hamlet just outside of Sag Harbor. I have next to my lazy boy to this day. My wife is not crazy about this arrangement. Piles and piles of documents and papers and magazines and reports. And I was sitting there, it's 1985, and I had written a book earlier to a degree, a large degree, because of my Long Island experience. The Long Island Lighting Company wanted to build 7 to 11 nuclear plants on Long Island, with Shoreham the first. In fact, all the licensing material for Shoreham, it says Shoreham Nuclear Power Station 1. There would be 2 more at Shoreham, 4 at Jamesport, which is further east on the Long Island Sound, several in between, And in fact, believe it or not, Lilco was considering putting up a nuclear plant in Sagaponack, which is like Bridgehampton, right here on the South Fork. And so I ended up learning about nuclear power, being convinced after the 3 Mile Island accident that this is a dangerous technology. Writing a book called Cover Up What You're Not Supposed to Know About Nuclear Power. So I knew about nuclear technology, and I'm reading this thing in a Department of Energy. It was Department of Energy Insider was the name, and I subscribed to it. And it talked about these 2 shuttle shots in '86. In fact, this was to be the next mission of the Challenger in May of '86. I used the U.S. Freedom of Information Act to get a lot of documents, which, well, they were quite amazing. I mean, they sort of denied that there could be a big accident with the shuttle. There had never been an accident before. In fact, what they said, I remember the words, because of the inherent safety of the shuttle, these nuclear shots would be okay. There'd be a 1 in 100,000 chance of a catastrophic accident with plutonium getting out. And actually, then I didn't move on this issue. In investigative reporting, and I teach my students this feverishly, you've got to be so ethical. There's no area of journalism where you should be more ethical because, I mean, in doing these exposés and exposing what's wrong, you better make sure it's really wrong.
Right.
So I didn't know. I'm not technophobic. I just came back from California, and I love getting the window seat on the airplane and watching America go by.
I just like to use the word technophobic, but go ahead.
No, I'm not. I love my Mazda Miata, an original from 1990. It still is. Now that we've gotten some warmth come to us this funny spring, just the other day I jumped into my Miata and tooled around Sag Harbor. I mean, technology can be very good and can be very, very bad. So because of my concerns about, well, if it's a 1 in 100,000 chance, there was probably more of a chance of that Southwest Airlines plane from California crashing. I'm not going to make a big. Should I go with this story?
Right.
But then the Challenger accident occurred. In fact, I was on my way to teach an investigative reporting course, first day of class, January 28th, '86, at SUNY Westbury, when I hear on the radio that the Challenger blew up. And I stop at one of the P.C. Richards store, and there's like 100 television sets with that iconic image of technical failure, the Challenger blowing up. And all I was thinking was that if it would have been the next mission in May, and it wouldn't be just, well, it was 6 very brave astronauts, and Chris McAuliffe, it was teacher in space program that she had signed up for. In fact, just parenthetically, 2 years before, somehow I got an application to be a journalist in space. And I considered that. I mean, I'd just been down in Nicaragua in the middle of the conflict with the Contras, and I went into the war zone, and how much more dangerous would going up, and I like airplane rides. When I got these documents from NASA finally, I wouldn't sign up to be a journalist in space, and I wonder if Chris McAuliffe was shown these documents. And there was a number of them talked about accident potentials. And they had like the solid rocket boosters in both sides of the, if you remember the way the shuttle used to look when they launched it, if one solid rocket booster didn't ignite, you'd have what was called in the documents a tip-over accident, and the whole thing would fall down and explode. In any case, I didn't do anything about the story until on the radio I hear about the Challenger exploding. And in the P.C. Richards store that I saw the image, there was a payphone. I mean, now with the cell phones, that's a kind of an antique thing. But there was a cell phone, and I wrote The Nation magazine, and I called these folks up, and I said, did you know that the next mission of the Challenger was to be a nuclear mission? No, and put together a piece, and it ran in a week, The Lethal Shuttle. And then as I got more and more into the use by NASA of nuclear in space and wondering why, Oh, for example, just last July, NASA had the Juno solar-powered satellite,
Right.
Juno, go all the way to Jupiter. So what are you doing with nuclear? But as I started investigating the use of nuclear in space and the accidents that have had occurred,
Right.
several of them, at that point I began making connections to Star Wars. It turns out that Star Wars was predicated, Reagan's Star Wars, on battle platforms energized by nuclear reactors, actual nuclear reactors above our heads, or what was called super plutonium systems, super RTGs, radioisotope thermoelectric generators. And I ended up writing a book on Star Wars and its nuclear connection called Weapons in Space. And as for nuclear in space in general, I ended up writing a book called The Wrong Stuff. It was like a play on The Right Stuff, Tom Wolfe's book. And I did some television, a lot of television on this, including 3 documentaries. One, Nukes in Space, the Nuclearization and Weaponization of the Heavens. And it's exciting to do this kind of work. And, I'm still at it. And I.F. Stone, who was a famous investigative reporter, it's something like he compared to fiddling while Rome burns. I mean, that may be a little negative and a little bit depressing, but you do fiddle while Rome burns, or while you could have nuclear accidents involving space technology. But the thing is, by doing what you do, you hope, and I find half the time, the problem is resolved by your journalism on these issues. In fact, for years, NASA stopped doing nuclear in space, and I was told by some folks at NASA that my pieces, my articles, had an impact. But then that administrator left, and another administrator came in, and these days they're back to doing, or thinking about doing, nuclear in space, a Mars mission with a nuclear-powered rocket to get them quicker to Mars. But I mean, what would happen if, and just in the last couple of years, there's been a good number of explosions on launch of rockets. 1 in 100 chemical rockets, in fact, blow up on launch. And here you're going to do a nuclear one? What happens if there's a problem with it? I mean, so I'm still on the story, and I can't say it's something I enjoy. I mean, your father was a travel writer for the Long Island Press. Now, that's a nice gig. I mean, you go to Paris and you write about what it's like in Paris. But for me, doing investigative reporting, not that travel writing is, in fact, now and then I've done a little travel writing. I've taken a trip and I've written a story and it's gotten published. But investigative reporting is a component of journalism. It's an area of journalism which I kind of think is the most important area. I mean, it was called muckraking years ago, and it was during the progressive era, 1900 to 1914, and the results of the muckrakers, whether it was the Pure Food and Drug Act, or, the fight against corruption in this country, journalistically led by Lincoln Steffens, or the fight to break up the Standard Oil Trust, which was done by a muckraker, Ida Tarbell. It was all broken up, Rockefeller Standard Oil Company.
Right.
I mean, these are accomplishments that can be done through journalism, investigative journalism, muckraking, crusading journalism. So I'm kind of very committed to do it. And as to your question, is it fun? Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
I think any kind of passion you just shared, it probably doesn't even feel like a job sometimes, because you're so enthralled in what you're doing.
Yeah, well, my brother, interestingly enough, is a blues guitarist, a rather famous blues guitarist, black blues. He studied with Mississippi John Hurt and Reverend Gary Davis and Skip James and so on. And he always says, if you do something that you love to do and you happen to get paid for it,
all the better.
That's great, and that's kind of what I do. I love to do this. I've gotten somehow old. At 75, I'm old, but I'm still there, looking through the documents, doing this kind of work, and I do it on a local level, like with the papers here, the weekly papers, now websites. My column runs on, which started at the Long Island Press, as I mentioned. On Riverhead Local and Smithtown Matters and so forth, Greater Patchogue, Greater Bayshore. And I do it nationally. I write for the Huffington Post and Common Dreams and Counterpunch and so forth on the internet and magazines that circulate nationally. And kind of, well, when you write for the internet today, I'll do a piece on HuffPost, and I mean, they'll be coming from all over the world. Yeah. It's international. If anybody wants to see my journalism, my writing, because a lot of people here probably just know it from the East Hampton Press and the Southampton Press. Mm-hmm. Just go to my website, www.karlgrossman, Karl with a K, Grossman, one word.com, and you can see my television work. In fact, there's a documentary I did on the true reality, the real story of the Chernobyl nuclear plant accident. It's right there on the opening page. You can watch it. And as for my first book, Cover Up What You're Not Supposed to Know About Nuclear Power, it was published. There was great reluctance of New York publishers to publish a book on nuclear power. I mean, my agent was Hilda Lindley, who some viewers might know. She lived out in Montauk. In fact, she's very much responsible for Montauk County Park, a great environmentalist. And she was my agent, a hot New York agent. And she could not believe that these New York publishers, who she knew when she went to, wouldn't publish, and this is months after 3 Mile Island, a book. I started right away writing a book, putting together a book on nuclear power after 3 Mile Island. But a local publisher, Permanent Press, based in Sag Harbor, which is run by Marty Shepard and Judy Shepard, they've allowed free downloads of Cover Up What You're Not Supposed to Know About Nuclear Power. So viewers can just go to my website, karlgrossman.com. There's a little button on the left top, books, and I've written a number of books, like 6 books now, but Cover Up was the first, and just hit that button, and then you go to the page where I have all the information on my books, and then you can download for free, based on the generosity of Marty and Judy, the latest edition of Cover Up What You're Not Supposed to Know About Nuclear Power.
It's incredible how things have evolved, just as you were talking about the internet and people who have no idea who you are just merely by looking at a byline, and you're in communication with these people from halfway around the world talking about things that are important to you and important to them, and that's something that's, I remember as a kid making a long-distance call. That was a big deal, and now look where we are.
Yeah, well, I mean, for your father or me, the biggest change in journalism would have to be how it's become globalized, how, like Marshall McLuhan talked about a global village. And it indeed is a global village. I mean, the Long Island Press had a large circulation. Mm-hmm. Your dad and I reached hundreds of thousands of people. It had a circulation of
right.
7th or 8th largest afternoon evening daily in the country. But it was mostly people from Queens, and then half the circulation was Queens, the other half was Nassau and Suffolk County people. So it was somewhat regional. And there's national papers of record, the New York Times, of course, the Washington Post, important national, but still, until the internet came along, you really didn't have the scope you have now. I mean, the Times was, of course, read, but really what was read overseas was the International Herald Tribune,
right.
which the Times and the Trib were partners in subsequently. And now, in fact, you don't have to go to the Huffington Post and have a blog like I have. Though, if you want, you should. You don't have to go to Counterpunch. All you need these days is a computer. and a website, and you're online. And if you get yourself some very inexpensive, which is amazing to me, television equipment, how expensive and small it's become. You can video stream. You could go to YouTube, and you could have your own television program. And in fact, people will watch it. The program I told you on Chernobyl that I did, the hits, because now it was made by Enviro Video, which is a company, nonprofit actually, company I'm a principal in, and we made the program on Chernobyl, but then subsequently we put it on the YouTube, put it up on YouTube after it played on many cable stations and some commercial stations, good number of film festivals. But now it's on YouTube, and anybody can watch it. Sure. And the person could be in China. I think in China. They're trying to quash the internet in China, hopefully in China, but certainly in the Netherlands or in Mexico or in most of the world.
That's fascinating. It's hard to wrap my brain around how quickly we've come in such a short amount of time. It just grows exponentially. The technology and the knowledge, just the idea that you have an idea, and this idea becomes a story. Everybody reads it.
Yeah.
Wow. Music is there. Could have gone that quickly?
Yeah, television, fleeting, very quick.
In Paris, love me in London, love me